Hi, you guys. It's time for a video. I have been working very hard on my novel Silver Skies 1996 version. And I started it in 1993. And the reason I've been neglecting it is because I tend to not be much of a fan of fiction. I'll admit it. Most of the books I've read are nonfiction, and there is very little fiction that I like. I'm usually very bored with fiction. I like to deal with real life because I'm an idealist and I'm like a person who I devote my whole life to trying to make this world a better place. And I can't make the world a better place if I'm living in fantasy land. So unless that fantasy land is related to my here and now, I'm not interested in reading about it, which may explain why um, I've neglected the novel. Uh, But I will say this much. The one novel that I have written, which is Silver Skies, everything else I've written is nonfiction, was very good. And it was very interesting the way I wrote it in the 1990s. And that's because the subplot in the novel was nonfiction. It was based on the 1996 Oklahoma City Federal Building. No, I think that was 1994, excuse me. The 19 anyways, the Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City Federal Building bombing, which I always believed was a government cover-up. And so I have a subplot in my novel where I have characters that are part of the government cover-up, and I show that. And one of the discrepancies, which the news media failed to point out in the federal building bombing, was that there's no way that a truck bomb could have brought down that building because of the way it was built. And so basically, my novel is, I have a main character who is like a Jewish freedom fighter, and everybody's losing their gun rights. And he's starting off on a crusade to try to give everybody guns because the government's taking guns away from the people. But it's mainly a love story. And I wrote it because I couldn't be with Brent Spiner then because I was married, and as a devout Christian, I felt like it would be sinful for me to divorce my husband to be with him, and yet I wanted to be with Brent. So I decided to reward him by writing him a masterpiece novel. And Brent is the reason I became a writer. I knew he was an actor, and I wanted to go into a profession where I could compliment him and help him in his career. And I thought that would be the way I could make it up to him that I couldn't marry him, because that's what I wanted to do. So I thought if I wrote him a very good novel that he could act in or direct in or be involved with, then I could make it up to him that I can't give him my body. And I decided as a bonus, I would pattern my main character after him somewhat, and the female lead after me somewhat. So in a sense, I created a character who was very much like Brent Spiner. He was Jewish from Houston, but I decided to put in my own little twist. I greatly admired the Thornbirds at the time, which was about a Catholic priest, Ralph de Bricassar. So I decided I would kind of pattern my book after the Thornbirds. I even wanted to imitate the voice of the Thornbirds, and I did pretty respectable. But I knew this was my first novel, and to make up for the fact that it was my first, and everybody knew everybody's first novel stunk, I was determined that I would put everything I could into learning the craft so that this would be professional enough that Hollywood would make a movie out of it. And I read tons and tons of books. And what I would do is, like, I got Orson Scott cards after I graduated from the Institute of Children's Literature, and I got the basics of fiction writing from that. And I got a very good foundation because my teacher was an award-winning children's writer, Jim Murphy. I started reading writing instruction books on my own, and I decided to go with the Writer's Digest series and the Elements of Fiction Writing series. And they have like conflict, action, and suspense, by William Noble, Characters and Viewpoint by Orson Scott Card, Scene and Structure by Jack M. Bickham, Beginnings, Middles, and Ends by Nancy Kress, Setting by Jack Bickham, Dialogue by Louis Turco, Description by Monica Wood. I got every single book in the series and some other books that I read that I thought would be helpful. And what I would do is as I was reading the instruction book, I would apply the knowledge that I gleaned from reading that to my novel in progress. And I worked from macro to micro. In other words, I started reading. When you write a novel, you work on it macro and micro, and there's some overlap. And what I mean by that, macro would be creation of characters, making the plot and your subplots, outlining. There's a lot of outlining involved when you're writing a novel, because you need to have a beginning, middle, and an end. That's the macro part, okay? You have your beginning, middle, and end. You've got your scenes or your characters in there, his actions, and then the reactions. Actions and reactions, cause and effect, very important. You don't want to have something major happen to the character and he not react to it. Then people are going to read this and think, wait a minute, his mother just got killed and he's not even talking about it. He's not doing anything. You see, so you have actions, reactions. That's all macro, okay? So you plan that first so that you can get like a broad overview of the novel in your mind, knowing how it's going to start, where the middle is, and the end. Okay. Once you outline, this is what I did. I did my general outline first, and then I started working on the scenes. Okay. Now we're starting to get to micro. Okay. Micro is where you start. So what I did a general outline first. I decided this would be a novel about a Jewish freedom fighter who was involved with a forbidden Christian woman. I wanted this because Brent was forbidden to me at the time, and I made him married and stuck in marriage to a controlling, abusive spouse, very much like the situation I had. So I did that, and then I started going micro, which would be plotting each scene. The best way I found to plot scene was use Jack Bickham's Scene and Structure, where each character had a goal. You see, the reader, when they pick up your book, they're going to decide, like, why do I want to read this book? And if you don't pay attention to the craft, then the story will make no sense to the reader. Like, I'll give you an example. You got Wuthering Heights right here. This is one of my favorite books. And I don't tend to like novels. So for me to like it, it's got to be pretty good. I'm more of a nonfiction reader. But what's really good about this is it opens up and you're interested. Heathcliff is described as, I beheld his black eyes withdraw so suspiciously under their brows as I rode up. And when his fingers sheltered themselves with a jealous resolution, still further in his waistcoat, and as I announced my name. Okay, this is working brilliantly for several reasons. First of all, you've got an interesting character. You can already tell that this Heathcliff is going to be an interesting character. He's not ordinary. And readers, when they pick up a book, they don't want to read about the ordinary everyday Joe, next door boring next door neighbor. He's got to have enough familiarity that he seems genuine and real, like he could really exist, but yet he's got to be different enough that he's intriguing. And there's got to be something about him that we'd want to hear what he's about him. This writer, and the point of view is excellent. Heathcliff is described not through his own mind. If the story was written in Heathcliff's point of view, nobody would want to read Wuthering Heights. The author brilliantly used a housekeeper, another point of view, who would tend to be more objective than Heathcliff. Heathcliff would not be objective about anything. He was very passionate. So this book's a winner. And the voice, telling details, but you're not overwhelmed with details, just enough to get your curiosity. You see, I find that a lot of writers that don't write stuff that gets a large audience, they put in too many details and they overwrite. They just put in all this irrelevant stuff so that the reader opens up. And I'll give you an example. I greatly admire K.M. Weiland. She's a very good writing teacher. She's especially good on the macro part of writing, which would be outlining, scene and structure, creation of characters, character arcs. In that area, I give her an A+. When it comes to the micro, though, that is handling point of view, the actual writing, I would give her a B. And I'm such a picky reader that if the book I'm reading is not A+ in macro and micro, I usually don't read the book. So you might say, what are you saying? Well, I am reading one of her earlier works, and I don't want to be guilty of copyright, so I'm just going to say this. I'm reading one of her earlier works, and she's introducing a character who's talking about how he's killed many, many times. And it doesn't bother him. So right off the bat, I'm thinking, why would I care about this character? Do I want to read about a character who kills all the time and it doesn't bother him? I found out later from reading, like, she talked about this, in some of her writing instruction, and a lot of unnecessary details in the beginning. She's losing me, okay? Now, I'm not saying she'd lose everybody, but I'm very picky. Like I said, I tend to like nonfiction. So I'm thinking, I'm reading this, and I'm thinking, too many details. They don't give me a reason to care. Because I tend to like characters that are a little bit more conscientious, or read through a point of view that's a little more conscientious. But the point of view is the problem. She's using omniscient, God's eye point of view, and it would be better if she went inside of this character's head, right up at the front. Probably should have used first person or third person limited, with a very strong focus in the opening. And I think she needs to show emotional anguish in the opening, so that people know right off the bat. You're saying, well, she's trying to show his emotional anguish from the outside in, and it's not working because the narrator is telling you what he feels instead of showing it. Okay? And let me tell you, and I'm going to kind of back off from this right now. If emotional anguish plays a large part of your plot, you need to show it, not tell it. It's much more powerful that way, with using telling details. And that's actually a mistake I made in my own novel, Silver Skies, K.M. Weiland. So I'm being just as hard on myself as I am on you. When I worked on my novel in the 1990s, I was working on it right as I was reading a book on craft and then applying those principles to the book immediately after I learned it, and it worked brilliantly. My first draft of this, so I wouldn't call it a first draft, because the way I wrote was I would write a first draft and then rewrite it about 30 times over the next couple days, and that would be my first draft. So when you read it, it didn't read like a first draft for that reason. But my first draft was brilliant. After reading books on craft, I decided this would be a circular story after reading Anson Dibble's plot. After reading Orson Scott Card's book on characters and viewpoint, I decided it would be a character story, which it was. And after reading, I also decided the best point of view would be third person limited, and I was right. The mistake I made when I rewrote the book was the same mistake that K.M. Weiland is making in this her piece that I'm reading. Is I used omniscient point of view when I should have used third person limited, with a very strong focus on the inside. That's what I did. I ruined it later. You may say, why do you care so much about this novel? Well, Laurie McBride reaches people appealing to their emotions. She's a good emotional manipulator. And she takes people who can't think for themselves, and she manipulates their emotions to make them her cuck. So if we're going to win people away from her, we have to be able to manipulate their emotions. And there's no better way to do that than with a literary masterpiece that gets down into their soul and makes them think. But to write a literary masterpiece, you got to pay attention to craft. And that's what I did with Silver Skies. So this book's going to be great. And I have a link for a page underneath that explains how I approach my writing.